The Sepulchre Engine. By David Hall. February 2, 2025. Chapter List. The Whispers of Ironwood. Descent into the Cogs. The Flesh-Forged Chorus. Ethereum's Embrace. The Dance of Severed Limbs. The Engine's Lament. Cathedral of Screams. The Puppeteer of Pain. Ironwood's Rotting Heart. Summary: in the sprawling, steampunk metropolis of Ironwood, a mechanical plague, born from a colossal engine beneath the city, transforms the inhabitants into grotesque, flesh and metal abominations. As the city descends into chaos, a desperate group of survivors battles through hordes of the transformed, uncovering the horrifying secrets of the Sepulchre Engine and the malevolent entity that controls it. Their journey is a descent into madness, a relentless struggle for survival against overwhelming odds and unspeakable horrors. The story is characterized by intense body horror, excessive violence, a high body count, and psychological terror. Chapter 1: The Whispers of Ironwood. The city of Ironwood was a monument to the ingenuity and ambition of man, a sprawling metropolis forged from iron and steam. Towering gears, hissing pipes, and colossal automatons were the lifeblood of the city, a testament to its mechanical prowess. Yet, beneath this veneer of progress, a dark secret festered, a corruption that spread not through blood or contagion, but through the very sinews of the city itself. The city was a sprawling mass of metal and stone, where the air was thick with the smell of coal and oil, and the nights were lit by the eerie glow of gas lamps. The sounds of the city were a constant symphony of industry, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the hiss of escaping steam, the whirring of gears, all overlaid with the shouts of workers and the rumble of heavy machinery. The colossal automatons, some towering several stories high, moved with a ponderous grace, their gears grinding and hissing, their metal limbs gleaming in the flickering gaslight. They were the city's tireless laborers, its protectors, and its pride. Kalen, a former watchman, haunted by the memories of the city he once swore to protect, navigated the labyrinthine underbelly of Ironwood. His face, etched with grime and weariness, reflected the decay that had begun to consume the once great metropolis. He carried a scavenged electro-lance, its hum a constant reminder of the violence that had become commonplace. The electro-lance was a formidable weapon, capable of slicing through metal and flesh with equal ease, its blue energy crackling with deadly power. He moved with a practiced stealth, his boots barely making a sound on the slick, metal surfaces, his senses heightened, ever vigilant for any sign of danger. His watchman's uniform, once a symbol of authority and order, was now tattered and torn, a grim reminder of the city's descent into chaos. The weight of his past failures pressed down on him, the faces of those he couldn't save haunting his waking hours. The first signs of the sickness were subtle, easily dismissed as the eccentricities of a city built upon arcane technology. A tremor in the rhythmic pulse of the city, a discordant grinding in the symphony of gears, a flicker in the gaslights that cast elongated, grotesque shadows. But then came the whispers, carried on the hissing steam vents and echoing through the narrow, cobbled alleyways. Whispers of metal grafted to flesh, of gears grinding bone, of a hunger that transcended mortal desires. These whispers spoke of a dark transformation, a merging of man and machine that defied the natural order. The whispers were often accompanied by the skittering of unseen things, the scratching of metal on stone, and the distant, rhythmic thumping of machinery that seemed to be growing louder, more insistent. The shadows themselves seemed to writhe and twist, taking on grotesque shapes that danced at the periphery of vision. Kalen had dismissed them as the ravings of fringe dwellers, the dregs of society who had succumbed to Ethereum addiction. But the whispers had grown louder, more insistent, morphing into guttural moans and metallic shrieks that echoed through the deserted sectors of the city. He had seen the first transformations, a clockwork merchant with gears protruding from his eye sockets, a steam pipe worker whose limbs had become fused with the very pipes he maintained. These were not mere accidents, but deliberate acts of corruption, a twisted vision of the future. The victims of the transformation often retained fragments of their former personalities, their mechanical eyes reflecting a flicker of their past selves, a haunting reminder of what they had lost. Their voices, when they spoke, were a grotesque parody of human speech, a distorted echo of their former selves. Tonight, the whispers were screams. He moved through the decaying district, his boots crunching on shattered glass and the mangled remains of automatons. The oppressive stench of oil and blood mingled with the acrid tang of ozone, creating a nauseating miasma that clung to the back of his throat. He passed abandoned workshops, their interiors transformed into nightmarish assembly lines where the transformed were created. Here, he saw half-finished abominations, a torso with gears for a spine, a head with wires instead of eyes, limbs twisted and contorted into grotesque shapes. The air thrummed with the low, rhythmic whirring of unseen machinery, a sound that made his teeth ache. The silence was broken only by the occasional drip of some unidentifiable fluid and the scuttling of unseen things in the shadows. The walls themselves seemed to pulse and writhe, as if the very fabric of the city was being corrupted. The very architecture of the city seemed to be turning against itself, metal groaning and twisting into unnatural forms. He found Illyra huddled in the ruins of a clock tower, her face pale and streaked with grime, her eyes wide with terror. She was a clockwork artisan, her delicate hands, once capable of crafting intricate marvels, now trembled uncontrollably. A small, intricately crafted music box lay broken beside her, its delicate gears exposed and twisted. The music box, a symbol of her craft, now lay in pieces, a metaphor for the broken city around them. She clutched a worn leather-bound journal to her chest, its pages filled with intricate sketches and diagrams of clockwork mechanisms, now useless against the mechanical plague. Her tools, once instruments of creation, now lay scattered and broken, a testament to the futility of her craft in the face of this mechanical horror. "They're changing," she gasped, her voice hoarse and trembling. "The machine song, it's twisting them. I saw Master Talon, his hands, they became gears, grinding into his own flesh." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "He was trying to fix me, and then his hands." She was shaking uncontrollably, her body racked with sobs, her delicate frame trembling with fear and exhaustion. The memory of Master Talon's transformation, the grinding of gears against flesh, was a fresh wound, a vivid reminder of the horrors they faced. Kalen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but his own heart was filled with dread. He had witnessed the transformation himself, the grotesque fusion of flesh and metal, the agonizing contortions of the body as it was assimilated into the machine. He knew this was no natural plague. This was something far more sinister, a malevolent force that sought to consume Ironwood from within. The transformation was a violation of the natural order that left its victims twisted and broken, their humanity replaced by cold, unfeeling metal. The thought of losing his own humanity, of becoming one of those grotesque abominations, filled him with a primal terror. He imagined his own flesh being replaced by gears and wires, his thoughts becoming a cold, mechanical calculation. A metallic shriek echoed from the darkness below, followed by the wet tearing of flesh. Kalen raised his electrolance, its energy crackling with a deadly blue light. The weapon felt heavy in his hand, a grim reminder of the battles to come. "We have to get out of here," he said, his voice grim and resolute. "We have to find the source of this madness before it consumes us all." His voice was filled with a newfound determination, a spark of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. He knew that their survival, and the survival of the city, depended on their ability to uncover the truth behind the mechanical plague. He had to find the Sepulchre Engine, the heart of this mechanical corruption, and destroy it before it was too late. They descended into the lower levels of the city, into the labyrinthine network of tunnels and pipes that fed Ironwood's insatiable hunger for power. The further they went, the more twisted and grotesque the environment became. The walls pulsed with a sickly, organic rhythm, and the air grew thick with the cloying scent of blood and machine oil. They were descending not just into the bowels of the city, but into the heart of a mechanical nightmare. The tunnels were narrow and claustrophobic, the darkness pressing in on them from all sides. The silence was broken only by the drip, drip, drip of some unknown fluid, and the distant grinding of machinery. The darkness seemed to have a life of its own, shifting and swirling, playing tricks on their eyes. Chapter 2, Descent into the Cogs. The descent into the lower levels of Ironwood was a descent into hell. The once orderly network of tunnels and pipes had become a twisted labyrinth, a grotesque parody of its former self. The smooth, metallic surfaces were gnawed and organic, pulsating with a dark, viscous fluid that glistened in the dim light. The air grew thick with the stench of decay and the metallic tang of blood, a nauseating combination that made Kalen's stomach churn. The fluids coating the walls seemed to writhe and pulse, as if the very structure of the city was alive and corrupted. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that they were being watched, that unseen eyes were following their every move. The darkness seemed to press in on them, suffocating and malevolent. The transformed lurked in the shadows, their mechanical limbs scraping against the walls, their guttural moans echoing through the narrow passages. They were drawn to Kalen and Illyra like moths to a flame, their movements jerky and unnatural, their eyes glowing with a malevolent green light. These were not the shambling, mindless automatons of his nightmares. They moved with a disturbing purpose, their twisted bodies contorted into forms optimized for killing. Some had blades for hands, others had gears that ground against their own flesh, their forms a grotesque fusion of metal and organic matter. They were the harbingers of a new mechanical age, their humanity sacrificed for the sake of the machine. Their mechanical eyes seemed to hold a flicker of their former selves, a spark of humanity trapped within a metal prison. Kalen and Illyra fought their way through the hordes of the transformed, their every step a desperate struggle for survival. Kalen's electrolance cleaved through metal and flesh with brutal efficiency, its energy cauterizing wounds even as it inflicted them. But the transformed seemed tireless, their mechanical strength far surpassing that of any human. Illyra, her small frame surprisingly agile, used her knowledge of the city's mechanisms to her advantage. She disabled the transformed with well-aimed strikes to their exposed gears and pressure valves, her movements precise and deadly. She moved with a desperate grace, her delicate hands now stained with blood and oil. She was forced to use her tools in ways she never imagined, her delicate instruments now weapons of destruction. She discovered a hidden strength within herself, a resilience she never knew she possessed. Her knowledge of clockwork mechanisms, once used to create intricate marvels, was now used to dismantle these mechanical abominations. With each victory, however, the horror of their situation deepened. The transformed were not mindless automatons. Glimmers of their former selves flickered within their mechanical eyes, a flicker of recognition, a spark of pain, a desperate plea for release. Kalen was haunted by the face of a former comrade, Sergeant Gregor, his features twisted into a grotesque mask of metal and flesh, his eyes pleading for oblivion. Kalen had been forced to kill him, the image of Gregor's pleading eyes burned into his memory. The memory of putting down his friend, the weight of that decision, threatened to crush him. He wondered if he was becoming a monster himself, if the constant killing was eroding his own humanity. The line between hunter and hunted blurred with each kill, each act of violence leaving a stain on his soul. They reached a vast chamber, the heart of Ironwood's power plant. Colossal pistons pumped with a deafening roar, and rivers of molten metal flowed through glowing conduits, illuminating the grotesque scene with an eerie, orange glow. The heat was intense, the air thick with smoke and the smell of burning flesh. But even this awe-inspiring sight was corrupted. The machinery, once a symbol of progress, was now twisted and grotesque, pulsating with the same dark energy that corrupted the transformed. The rhythmic pounding of the pistons seemed to echo the beating of a monstrous heart, a dark and malevolent force that permeated the entire chamber. The very metal of the machinery seemed to writhe and pulse, as if it were alive and in pain. Grotesque figures, half human, half machine, were chained to the machinery, their bodies serving as fuel for the infernal processes. Their screams, drowned out by the cacophony of the machines, echoed in Kalen's mind, a symphony of suffering that threatened to shatter his sanity. He saw a former engineer, his body fused with a massive boiler, his mouth stretched into a permanent, silent scream. The sight of these tortured souls fueled Kalen's rage and despair. He felt a growing sense of helplessness, a feeling that they were fighting a losing battle against an unstoppable force. The engineer's eyes, wide with terror, pleaded for release, a silent scream that echoed in Kalen's mind. In the center of the chamber, they found the source of the transformation. A colossal, pulsating engine, its surface a grotesque tapestry of flesh and metal, dominated the space. It hummed with a dark energy, a malevolent life force that seemed to corrupt everything it touched. This was the Sepulchre Engine, the heart of Ironwood's mechanical plague. The engine seemed to pulse with a dark sentience, a twisted will that sought to remake the world in its own image. It was a monument to madness, a testament to the hubris of man and the horrors that lay hidden beneath the veneer of progress. The engine was a blasphemy, a fusion of life and machine that defied all natural laws. The engine was a living nightmare, a fusion of organic and inorganic matter that defied all natural laws. It pulsed and throbbed, its surface a mass of writhing metal and flesh, connected by a network of pulsating veins and sparking wires. It was a monument to madness, a testament to the horrors that lurked beneath the city's gleaming surface. The sight of the engine filled Kalen with a profound sense of dread, a feeling that this was a battle they could not win. He wondered if they were already too late, if the city was already lost beyond redemption. The engine seemed to exude a palpable aura of corruption, a dark and malevolent energy that poisoned the very air. Chapter 3, The Flesh-Forged Chorus. The Sepulchre Engine pulsed with a vile energy, its mechanical heart beating with a grotesque rhythm. From its depths emanated a horrifying symphony, a cacophony of grinding gears, hissing steam, and the tortured screams of the damned. Kalen dubbed it the Flesh-Forged Chorus, a sound that assaulted the senses and threatened to unravel the very fabric of reality. It was a sound that spoke of pain, of suffering, of a hunger that could never be satisfied. The chorus was a constant reminder of the engine's power, a relentless assault on their sanity. It was a dark and twisted masterpiece, a symphony of mechanical madness. The sound seemed to vibrate deep within their bones, resonating with their primal fears. As they approached the engine, the transformed swarmed towards them, their attacks becoming more frenzied and desperate. They were no longer mere victims of the transformation, they were the engine's devoted disciples, their bodies twisted and contorted to serve its will. They moved with a disturbing coordination, their mechanical limbs working in unison, their attacks precise and merciless. The transformed were the engine's puppets, their bodies and minds enslaved to its dark purpose. They were the vanguard of a new mechanical age, their humanity sacrificed at the altar of the machine. Their eyes burned with a fanatical zeal, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of devotion. One particularly grotesque figure, a hulking brute whose body had been fused with a massive steam-powered drill, charged towards Illyra. The drill spun with a terrifying speed, tearing through the air with a high-pitched whine. Kalen, reacting instinctively, tackled her out of the way, the drill tearing through the metal floor where she had stood, sending sparks flying and showering them with debris. The force of the impact sent tremors through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the engine's domain. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and the screech of rending metal. The drill bit into the metal floor, sending shivers up Kalen's spine. Kalen rolled to his feet, his electro-lance crackling with deadly energy. He faced the monstrosity, his heart pounding in his chest. The ensuing battle was a brutal dance of metal and flesh, a whirlwind of violence and desperation. Kalen, fueled by adrenaline and a primal urge to protect Illyra, fought with a ferocity he never knew he possessed. He roared in defiance, his voice a counterpoint to the engine's lament. His roar was a challenge, a refusal to surrender to the darkness. It was a primal scream of defiance, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. His voice echoed through the chamber, a defiant cry against the mechanical god. He dodged the creature's clumsy but powerful attacks, his electro-lance finding the weak points in its armored flesh. He severed hydraulic lines, disabled gears, and finally, with a desperate lunge, plunged the electro-lance into the creature's core, disrupting the flow of corrupted etherium that sustained it. The creature convulsed violently, its mechanical limbs flailing wildly, before collapsing into a heap of twisted metal and gore. Its death throes were a grotesque spectacle, a final, violent spasm of metal and flesh. The stench of burning oil and flesh filled the air, a testament to the brutality of their struggle. The creature's mechanical eye flickered and died, its last vestige of life extinguished. The creature's dying screams were a grotesque symphony, a final, discordant note in the flesh-forged chorus. But there was no time to rest. The flesh-forged chorus intensified, and more of the transformed closed in, their eyes burning with the same malevolent green light. They were surrounded, trapped in a mechanical nightmare with no escape. The transformed seemed to emerge from the very walls, their numbers endless, their hunger insatiable. The engine seemed to be able to create them from the very fabric of the city. The transformed moved with a relentless purpose, their mechanical bodies driven by the engine's insatiable will. They were a tide of metal and flesh, a relentless wave threatening to engulf them. Chapter 4, Etherium's Embrace. Etherium, the lifeblood of Ironwood, the energy source that powered its magnificent machines, had become the instrument of its destruction. The Sepulchre Engine had corrupted it, twisting its life-giving properties into a horrifying contagion. What once flowed through the city's veins as a source of energy now carried death and transformation. The engine had turned the city's greatest asset into its deadliest weapon. Etherium, once a symbol of progress and innovation, was now a curse, a plague that consumed the flesh and twisted the mind. The very essence of the city, its life force, had been corrupted and twisted into a tool of destruction. Etherium's embrace was the survivor's grim term for the agonizing process of transformation. It began with a burning fever, a searing heat that spread through the victim's veins like molten metal. Their skin would blister and crack, revealing the metallic growths beneath. The process was not quick, but a slow, agonizing corruption of the flesh. Then came the metallic growths, gears, pistons, and wires erupting from the flesh, contorting the body into a grotesque parody of its former self. The process was agonizing, both physically and mentally, as the victim's mind was slowly subsumed by the engine's will. They would become puppets, their own thoughts and desires replaced by the engine's imperatives. The embrace was a violation of the body and mind that left its victims broken and twisted. It was a fate worse than death, a living nightmare of mechanical assimilation. The embrace was a slow and agonizing death, a stripping away of all that made them human. Kalen and Illyra witnessed this horrific process firsthand as they fought their way through the engine's domain. They saw friends, allies, and even enemies succumb to the transformation, their screams echoing through the metal corridors, a chilling testament to the engine's power. One of their own, a young scavenger named Merrick, was dragged away, his cries for help abruptly cut short. They later found him, his body fused with a nearby pipe, his eyes glowing with the now familiar green light. His transformation was a gruesome spectacle, his body stretched and contorted into an unnatural shape. He had become a grotesque parody of himself, his humanity replaced by cold, unfeeling metal. His mechanical voice, when he spoke, was a distorted echo of his former self, a chilling reminder of what they had lost. The psychological toll of Etherium's embrace was immense. The constant fear of infection, the horror of seeing loved ones transformed into monstrous parodies of themselves, the guilt of having to kill those who were already lost, it weighed heavily on the survivors' minds, pushing them to the brink of madness. Kalen found himself increasingly reliant on his electro-lance, the feel of its power a grim comfort in this mechanical hell. The constant threat of infection, the knowledge that any wound could lead to their transformation, drove the survivors to the edge of despair. It was a constant reminder of their own mortality, their own vulnerability to the engine's insidious influence. The embrace was a dark cloud hanging over them, a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence. At one point, Illyra was wounded, a spray of corrupted etherium splashing onto her arm. Kaelin watched in horror as the metallic growths began to spread, the gears and wires twisting beneath her skin, her delicate features contorted in agony. He was faced with an impossible choice: end her suffering quickly, or watch her become a grotesque puppet of the Sepulchre Engine. The decision, and the weight of its consequences, threatened to shatter his resolve. He cradled her in his arms, the cold metal spreading across her warm flesh, and for a moment, he considered the unthinkable. The thought of killing Illyra, of ending her life to spare her from the embrace, was a torment greater than any he had ever known. He felt his own humanity slipping away, the darkness threatening to consume him as well. The image of Illyra, her body twisted and broken, haunted his thoughts. Chapter 5, The Dance of Severed Limbs. In the face of the relentless mechanical onslaught, Kaelin and Illyra were forced to adopt increasingly brutal tactics. To destroy the transformed, it was often not enough to simply disable them, they had to be dismembered, their mechanical components separated from their corrupted flesh to prevent them from reanimating. The engine's influence was insidious, capable of reanimating even the most heavily damaged of its creations. The transformed were like puppets, their strings pulled by the engine's dark will, their bodies refusing to stay down. They were a mockery of life, a grotesque parody of the human form. The transformed were a relentless enemy, their mechanical bodies driven by a dark and insatiable hunger. The dance of severed limbs became a grim necessity, a macabre ballet of violence and desperation. Kaelin's electrolance, initially a tool of law and order, became an instrument of gruesome dismemberment, carving through metal and flesh with terrifying efficiency. He became a whirlwind of motion, his movements fluid and deadly, his face a mask of grim determination. Each swing of his lance was a desperate act, a prayer for survival. Illyra, her knowledge of clockwork mechanisms twisted into a weapon of grim necessity, targeted the transformed's weak points, disabling their limbs and leaving them vulnerable to Kaelin's deadly strikes. She moved with a chilling precision, her small frame belying a surprising strength and ruthlessness. She had become a grim angel of death, her hands stained with the blood of the transformed. She discovered a dark talent for destruction, a skill born of necessity and despair. Her delicate hands, once used to create intricate clockwork marvels, were now instruments of destruction, dismantling the engine's grotesque creations. Each act of violence, however, took its toll. They were forced to witness the grotesque spectacle of severed limbs and spurting fluids, the mechanical spasms of the dying, the horrifying resilience of the transformed. The line between survivor and monster blurred with every swing of the weapon, every crunch of metal on bone. Kaelin began to have nightmares, visions of the transformed reaching out to him with severed limbs, their mechanical eyes filled with accusation. He saw the faces of those he had killed, their expressions twisted in pain and anger. The weight of their deaths pressed down on him, threatening to crush him under its burden. He wondered if he was becoming as monstrous as the creatures he fought. The horror of their situation was compounded by the fact that the transformed were not mindless drones. They retained fragments of their former selves, their eyes expressing terror, pain, or a desperate plea for release. Kaelin and Illyra were forced to kill people they once knew, their faces contorted into nightmarish masks of metal and flesh, their voices issuing guttural moans that were a mockery of human speech. Kaelin recognized a former watchman, his face half obscured by a tangle of wires and gears, his mouth moving as if to speak. The watchman's eyes, filled with a desperate sadness, haunted Kaelin's waking hours. He wondered if he would ever be able to forget the faces of the dead, the ghosts of those he had been forced to kill. The memory of their former lives, the echoes of their humanity, made each kill a fresh torment. Chapter 6, The Engine's Lament. The Sepulchre Engine dominated the lower levels of Ironwood, its presence a palpable force that warped reality itself. The air itself seemed to vibrate with its dark energy, the very walls pulsing in time with its mechanical heartbeat. But its most insidious weapon was not its mechanical creations, but its voice, a haunting, pervasive sound that the survivors called the Engine's Lament. The Engine's influence was all-encompassing, a suffocating presence that threatened to crush their spirits. It was a constant reminder of the Engine's power, a dark and oppressive force that permeated every corner of its domain. The lament was a psychic assault, a relentless barrage that eroded their sanity. The lament was not a sound of sorrow, but of insatiable hunger. It was the constant, grinding, pulsating hum of the engine, a dark symphony of metal and flesh that resonated deep within the bones, driving its victims to the brink of madness. It was a siren song, a twisted melody that promised power and oblivion, luring the desperate and the broken into the engine's mechanical embrace. It spoke of a twisted unity, a merging of flesh and machine into a single, perfect entity. The lament was a constant temptation, a dark promise that whispered in the deepest corners of their minds. It offered solace, strength, and a twisted form of immortality. As Kalen and Illyra drew closer to the engine's core, the lament grew louder, more insistent. It became a physical force, a wave of dark energy that battered their minds and bodies, threatening to overwhelm their senses. They felt its pull, the irresistible urge to surrender their will, to become one with the machine, to join the flesh-forged chorus. The lament whispered their names, promising to ease their pain, to grant them strength, to make them whole. It offered them solace, a twisted form of peace in the heart of the nightmare. It promised to end their suffering, to make them part of something greater, something eternal. The lament also offered glimpses into the engine's twisted consciousness, fragmented visions of a world consumed by metal, of flesh enslaved to the machine. They saw images of grotesque grandeur, of cities rebuilt in the engine's image, of humanity transformed into a perfect, mechanical unity. These visions, seductive and terrifying, preyed on their deepest fears and desires, threatening to shatter their resolve. Kalen saw visions of himself, his body augmented with gleaming metal, wielding power beyond his wildest dreams. Illyra saw her lost parents, their faces serene and whole, beckoning her to join them. The visions were a twisted mirror, reflecting their deepest desires and their greatest fears. The lament showed them what they had lost, and what they could gain, if only they would surrender. The engine, they realized, was not merely a machine. It was a god, a dark deity that demanded worship and sacrifice. And its lament was the twisted gospel that promised salvation through mechanical assimilation. The engine was a dark messiah, its lament the scripture of its twisted faith. It offered a twisted form of transcendence, a merging with the machine that would erase all pain and suffering. Chapter 7, Cathedral of Screams. The heart of the Sepulchre Engine's domain was a vast, cavernous chamber known as the Cathedral of Screams. It was a grotesque parody of a religious sanctuary, its walls lined with twisted metal and pulsating flesh, its floor slick with blood and machine oil. The transformed were gathered here in their thousands, their mechanical moans and screams echoing off the grotesque architecture, creating a symphony of suffering that was both deafening and soul-rending. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the metallic tang of blood, and the cloying sweetness of corrupted etherium. The cathedral was a monument to pain, a testament to the engine's power. It was a place of ultimate horror, a glimpse into the engine's twisted vision of paradise. In the center of the cathedral stood the engine itself, a colossal fusion of organic and inorganic matter, a pulsating mass of metal, flesh, and wires. It pulsed with dark energy, its surface writhing with grotesque appendages and half-formed faces. It was a vision of mechanical hell, a testament to the engine's power and its insatiable hunger. The engine was the center of this mechanical web, its influence stretching out to every corner of the city. It was a dark god, and the cathedral was its temple. The engine was the object of their twisted worship, the source of their mechanical existence. Kalen and Illyra fought their way through the cathedral, their every step a battle against the engine's twisted creations. The transformed were more numerous and grotesque here, their bodies warped into nightmarish parodies of human form. They wielded crude mechanical weapons, bone saws grafted onto metal arms, steam-powered flails that dripped with blood, and energy weapons that fired bolts of corrupted etherium. The transformed moved with a fanatical devotion, their bodies no longer their own, their wills subsumed by the engines. They were the engine's zealots, their bodies and minds dedicated to its dark purpose. They were the engine's chosen, their flesh and metal melded into a twisted unity. The closer they got to the engine, the more intense the horror became. They witnessed unspeakable acts of violence and depravity, the mechanical violation of flesh, the fusion of living beings with inanimate objects. The Cathedral of Screams was a place of ultimate suffering, a monument to the engine's reign of terror and a glimpse into its twisted vision for the future of Ironwood. They saw a group of transformed forcing others onto a mechanical altar, their bodies being slowly integrated into the engine's structure. The sight was a blasphemy, a grotesque parody of sacrifice and devotion. It was a dark mass, a celebration of mechanical corruption. Chapter 8, The Puppeteer of Pain. Deeper within the Sepulchre Engine's core, Kalen and Illyra encountered the entity that controlled the mechanical monstrosity. The survivors called it the Puppeteer of Pain, for it was not a singular being, but a collective consciousness, a gestalt entity formed from the fused minds of the transformed. It was the engine's will given form, a malevolent intelligence that orchestrated the city's transformation. The puppeteer was the architect of their suffering, the dark mind behind the mechanical plague. It was the ultimate expression of the engine's twisted desires. The puppeteer lurked within the engine's heart, a shadowy presence that manipulated its mechanical limbs and directed its twisted creations with cruel precision. It was a cunning and malevolent intelligence, a master of psychological and physical torment. It delighted in suffering, finding pleasure in the screams of its victims and the sight of their broken bodies. The puppeteer was a sadistic entity, its every action driven by a desire to inflict pain. It was the dark heart of the machine god. When Kalen and Illyra finally confronted the puppeteer, it did not manifest as a physical being, but as a swirling vortex of metal and flesh, a chaotic amalgamation of tortured screams and mechanical whispers that assaulted their minds. It spoke to them in their own voices, taunting them with their deepest fears and regrets, offering them twisted temptations. Its voice was a chorus of the damned, a symphony of suffering that echoed through their skulls. The puppeteer was a master of illusion, capable of twisting their perceptions and preying on their deepest insecurities. It was a psychic predator, feeding on their pain and despair. The puppeteer probed their minds, seeking to exploit their weaknesses and break their will. It showed Kalen visions of his past failures, the people he failed to save, the horrors he could not prevent. To Illyra, it offered the chance to undo her parents' death, but at the cost of becoming a living component of the engine, a cog in its grand design. It reveled in their pain, feeding on their despair. The puppeteer was a psychic vampire, draining their hope and leaving them hollow. It sought to break them, to corrupt them, to make them its puppets. To destroy the engine, they realized, they had to destroy the puppeteer. It was not merely a machine that they fought, but a malevolent god, a force that sought to corrupt and consume everything in its path. The puppeteer was the engine's soul, its destruction the only way to end its reign of terror. It was a battle for the very soul of Ironwood. Chapter 9, Ironwood's Rotting Heart. The final confrontation with the puppeteer was a battle for the soul of Ironwood. Kalen and Illyra fought not just with their weapons, but with their memories, their emotions, and their unwavering determination to preserve their humanity. They were fighting for their sanity, for their very souls. The fate of the city, and perhaps the world, rested on their shoulders. It was a battle against a force that sought to erase all that made them human. They navigated the engine's core, a chaotic landscape of pulsating flesh, twisting metal, and sparking wires. The puppeteer's influence grew stronger with every step, the engine's lament reaching a fever pitch, threatening to overwhelm their senses and shatter their minds. The very laws of physics seemed to bend and twist around them, the world becoming a grotesque reflection of the puppeteer's twisted consciousness. The engine's core was a living nightmare, a place where reality itself seemed to unravel. It was a journey into the heart of madness, a descent into the abyss. Kalen, fueled by rage and grief for the fallen, fought with a reckless abandon, his electro-lance a whirlwind of destruction, cutting through the engine's defenses and the puppeteer's grotesque manifestations. He roared defiance, his voice echoing through the engine's core, a challenge to the mechanical god. His roar was a battle cry, a testament to his refusal to surrender. He fought like a man possessed, his every blow fueled by a burning desire for vengeance. Illyra, her knowledge of the machine now a weapon against it, targeted the engine's vital systems, disrupting its flow of corrupted etherium and weakening its hold on the transformed. She moved with a desperate grace, her small frame weaving through the chaos, her movements precise and deadly. She was the counterpoint to the engine's twisted logic, a beacon of hope in the heart of darkness. She fought with a fierce determination, her small hands wielding tools of destruction with surprising skill. In the climactic battle, Kalen reached the engine's central nexus, the point where the puppeteer's consciousness was most concentrated. He plunged his electro-lance into the pulsating core, unleashing a surge of energy that disrupted the engine's functions and severed its connection to the transformed. The backlash was immense, a wave of pure energy that threatened to tear him apart. The energy was a raw, untamed force, a chaotic explosion of light and power. It was the death knell of the engine, the end of its reign of terror. The engine convulsed violently, its mechanical limbs thrashing, its tortured screams echoing through the collapsing chamber. The puppeteer's hold on reality began to unravel, its twisted consciousness fading into oblivion. The transformed, freed from its control, collapsed into inert heaps of metal and flesh, their mechanical lives extinguished. The silence that followed was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony that had preceded it. The silence was the sound of death, but also of liberation. It was the sound of a city finally free from its mechanical nightmare. Kalen and Illyra stood amidst the carnage, battered and broken, but alive. They had silenced the engine, but the city of Ironwood was forever scarred. The mechanical plague had been stopped, but its legacy would linger, a dark stain on the city's history. The cost of their victory was immeasurable. They had saved the city, but they had also lost a part of themselves in the process. They were survivors, but they were also haunted by the ghosts of the past. They looked out at the ruined city, the once proud metropolis now a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams. The long climb back to the surface began, leaving behind the silence of the defeated engine. As they ascended, they knew that they would never truly escape the horrors they had witnessed. The Sepulchre Engine was gone, but its legacy lived on, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of progress. The memory of the engine, and the horrors they had endured, would forever haunt their dreams. They carried the scars of the battle, both physical and emotional, a constant reminder of the price of freedom. The end.